Hey, you're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and I'm here with my awesome co-host, Ivan. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and our special guest today?
So thanks, Shawn. My name's Ivan Zach. I come from a veterinary background and then spent some time in technology with a startup called SmartFlow that eventually ended up in IDEXX's hands, where I led the software division and then left IDEXX and currently in semi-retired state looking for next best thing. Today we have a guest, Dr. Justine Lee, a personal friend of mine. We met through, I don't remember when it was, I think it was 2015. I worked in emergency hospital. It was 404 Veterinary Emergency and Specialty Hospital in Toronto, north of Toronto, where Justine came out to give a talk on critical care. And I think it was a little bit of a flavor of toxicology and a mixture of it. The reason why I remember it is because we both were at the beginning of two startups, myself with SmartFlow and Justine was at the beginning of VETgirl. And I think we just started talking the sort of entrepreneurial talk and connected. And I think in the last 5 years, just kind of intersecting different areas of veterinary medicine. A little bit about Justine. So she's a double boarded specialist in toxicology and critical care. She published over 45 scientific journals and articles, and she's a speaker at multiple conferences. Obviously, as founder of VETgirl, which has over 185,000 followers, 77,000 followers on Instagram. What I didn't know about you, what we found in research, that you're a co-host analyst of National Geographic Wild Animal PR Live, which is also really cool. And you have hobbies of ultimate frisbee, ice hockey, and hiking, traveling, running, gardening, reading. And you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in 2014 and spent 2 summers in Rome when you were a kid. So that's what we have on you.
That's pretty good internet stalking.
Yeah, overall, a boring person, it sounds like.
Yes. Very, very honored to be on your podcast. And Ivan, we actually met in June of 2013. It was a week before I released VETgirl Live. We just celebrated our 6-year anniversary. So we met just at the very, very beginning. And we're definitely drawn to each other conversation-wise. I remember we were sitting at dinner and talking about business. And that's where it's been so interesting just to see each other's business grow.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, just kind of starting to extend into that. So one of the things that is fascinating is that a lot of the businesses use podcasts these days as sort of the marketing material or collateral to whatever they do and sort of introduce their customers to whatever they do with sort of, hint of their product. And that's sort of the collateral material. You did something very innovative. You took the podcast and created it into a product. So it would be super interesting to understand how did the concept came about, and then what made you choose podcast as a platform for your business?
Well, as a little bit of background, when I actually first came up with the idea, it was during my last year of my residency at University of Pennsylvania in 2003. I was studying for my emergency critical care boards, and I was studying 12 to 14 hours a day, and I wanted to go for a trail run with my dog just for some mental health and a break. And I felt guilty for doing so. And I felt like, gosh, I wish there was a technology out there where someone could just read me a veterinary article and I could go for a run at the same time. And there was no smartphone technology back then. It was a Walkman that I had. And then I came up with the idea again when I was studying for my toxicology boards in 2012. And again, I just wish that someone would be able to read me a toxicology chapter so I could learn at the same time while multitasking. And just around this time, the technology was just starting to develop. And so that's when I reached out to a fellow criticalist, Dr. Garrett Pachtinger. We actually trained at University of Pennsylvania together. That's when I reached out to him in 2012 and said, hey, I have this idea. And I had picked him specifically because he was a vet student when I was a resident at Penn. And he was the most tech savvy person that I ever knew. He was the first to sync Palm Pilots. He was very generous with intellectual property. He had created an online version of a Penn formulary and gave it free to all the veterinary students and the residents and interns, which was very helpful. And so we actually started VETgirl in 2012. Release it out to the veterinary public July 1st, 2013. So again, just celebrated our 6-year anniversary, and it's been an amazing ride. What we wanted to be was a clinically relevant, practical way for veterinary professionals to be able to get their continuing education online. And so when we first released, we actually were helping educate veterinary professionals with podcasts and webinars. Back when we first released, you actually had to pay to get access to the podcasts. And we did this because, as you guys know, creating a podcast is so much work. And what we had to do was we had to critically review a veterinary article. Then we had to type it up and summarize it. We had to upload it onto a web page, upload it onto Apple Podcasts. And it was so much work. So for a 10 to 15 minute podcast, it took us 4 to 5 hours of work. And so initially, our podcasts were only limited to subscribers. And then 2 years later, I realized, you know what? I don't pay for any podcasts. I listen to 1 to 2 hours of podcasts a day as a great way of being able to, keep up on news or keep up to date on current events. And that's when we decided to release it free to the veterinary community. So we did this in about 2015. And even though this pained us because it was so much work, we wanted to be able to do this as a way of being able to A, get our name out there, but B, also provide a great way for people to be able to learn free. And I'm excited to say we are the #1 downloaded veterinary podcast out there. We've been downloaded over 2.4 million times in the past 3 to 4 years in over 170 countries.
Wow. It's so incredible. It's such an accomplishment. Congratulations on, taking the podcast world by storm.
Thank you so much.
How do you choose podcast topics? Are they situations that you've encountered? Are they suggestions from your audience? Is it a bit of all of that? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So, we stuck with the original goal, which is always to deliver clinically relevant, practical, continuing education. As a vet, I know that when I used to get my JAVMA articles, those journals would collect into piles that were, 5 to 6 feet tall in my office. And then every 2 years, I'd throw them into the recycling bin because we're all too busy to be able to read our journals. And so we wanted to be able to provide clinical vignettes in the form of podcasts. And so what we do is we comb the veterinary literature to look for the most clinically relevant, important updates that vets need to know about, and veterinary technicians and veterinary students. So if you don't have time to read your veterinary journal, we take the time to review that article. All the articles are reviewed by board certified specialists. And then again, most of them are about 10 to 20 minutes long. But again, they're really designed to be clinical summaries of the key updates in veterinary medicine.
That's excellent. So from the business side of things, you said that you made a change along the way in how you wanted to deliver it and whether it's free or not free. With a startup, there's always pivot. You start with one idea and then you have to pivot because the market reacts in different ways. So how many times did you have to make those turns and change the approach, but still stick with the vision? So that sounds like a significant one when you're trying to sell it and then change. But are there any other pivots that you had to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ivan. I would say that we stuck with our main goal of clinically relevant practical CE, but we had to do a few pivots. The first one, again, being the release of the podcast free to the veterinary public or to the general public. The second one was the pivot of adding more continuing education. And so in 2019, we actually went from 12 hours a year of CE back in 2013 to 20 hours the following year, to 40 hours the third year. And we're excited in 2019, one of our biggest pivots is we actually expanded to 100 hours of new race-approved CE each year.
Wow.
So we expanded to 4 different tracks. And so we've always had our small animal track, but in 2019, we added a large animal track, a leadership track, and a veterinary technician track. We also pivoted and added an online forum in 2019. And so towards the end of 2018, after our first VETgirl U conference, we did expand quite a bit. I would say another pivot that we had was expanding to in-person CE. We have always prioritized convenient online CE. So if you can't travel to a conference one year, you can get all your CE from the comforts of home. And for the first time ever, we decided to host a live conference, and this was in Minneapolis in August of 2018. And the main reason why was because We wanted to be able to meet our fan base and connect with those that were our most loyal followers. And we capped out and sold out at 550 people. And the amazing thing is we actually sold out before the agenda was even released. We sold out within months. So it was an incredible conference. We had about 75% respond to the survey saying it was the best conference they've ever been to in 20 to 40 years. So that was another significant pivot. And so we've decided that while our main mojo is online CE, we're going to continue with a live in-person conference every other year.
It's so interesting, Justine. I've gone to hundreds of veterinary conferences, and it's so interesting as an entrepreneur and as an innovator. I go to these conferences, and the one thing that runs through my head is this is so old school. This is so yesterday's way of doing things. And if I was to describe conferences, I would definitely not describe them as innovative businesses like Uber or Airbnb. It would be the exact opposite. But it's interesting to hear you say that there's maybe a blend. I think the veterinary conference of the future is going to be very different from what it is today. And I'd like to get you to speak to that a little bit. What do you see the future of this continuing education piece in veterinary medicine? Where do you think the innovations will come from? What are you seeing on the ground when you talk to people? What do they tell you?
I would say that our conference is a little bit different than traditional conferences in that we are always going to be a boutique conference. We're not going to be over, 1,000 people, or at least that's not what we're projecting. We want to keep this as a boutique conference. And again, if I was going to envision the future of veterinary medicine, conferences are still always going to be there because people want to connect in person. They want to catch up with their classmates. They want to go to the reunions. They want to walk the exhibit hall. So I definitely think there's a place for combined online and in-person continuing education. So that will never go away. What I think is important is veterinary professionals, as we know, are generally introverted. And so they do like smaller conferences, in my opinion. And again, it's still really important that they be able to connect to exhibitors and classmates. So I really think it's going to be a blend.
Yeah, it's interesting. They keep changing. I remember, some of the most interesting ones that I have been to are like the radiology conference, where it's like a reunion. You're seeing the same people every year in, year out. It's a wonderful experience, start to end. And then you go to some of these giant conferences like NABC 2 years ago. I don't know if you both were there, but the lineup of food was longer than the period that they had allowed for lunch. And, it's just all of these things that don't make sense are happening. And it's very much in flex. And I think there's an opportunity for them to change. And I don't know what that change looks like. I agree that the in-person component of them is very, very important. But, when you have to grab a shuttle to get from one side of the exhibit hall to the other, it's a bit exhausting.
It provides people options if they want to go to 20 different tracks and check out lots of different options out there. I will say that VETgirl U is similar to the ACBR conference in that it's only one track. Veterinarians, veterinary students, veterinary technicians are all in one room together. Whether or not that will change in the future, we don't know. But I feel like people have, FOMO. They're worried that they're missing this awesome lecture because they're stuck in this one. And so, it's really personal preference on what size conference people enjoy or learn best from. We wanted to make our conference unique and different, in addition to being boutique, in that you were completely taken care of the whole time. As soon as you registered, you got your VETgirl LL Bean backpack, a backpack you weren't going to throw away. You had free daycare. We were the first conference ever in the world to offer free daycare to parents. And that was a huge, huge hit. We offered free amusement park passes to Nickelodeon Universe, which is in the Mall of America. Every single meal was covered. So they had a great breakfast, a great lunch. We had a gala, we had a paddle boat cruise. And so our goal was to wine and dine our attendees just because we wanted to give back. They had been so loyal to us in helping build us for the past 5 to 6 years. So we wanted to make sure that we were treating them really well. We actually had attendees say, you guys are charging way too little. So it was a really amazing event.
That's so awesome. So to shift a little bit, I remember early days, we've been talking a lot about marketing and starting the products, and you were asking some questions. And I'm happy to say that I failed the prediction that the name VETgirl was very focused audience. One of the things that I remember I told you early days that having a girl in the name might detract other people that are not girl.
Oh, I love when you're
industry.
wrong, Ivan. It's so awesome.
I know.
Thank you for
love
doing that for me, Justine, by the way.
So, well, in my defense, I think 85 right now percent are women in the industry. So maybe that's what resonated. But then, now that I think about it, was that more a VETgirl? Is that the brand of Justine Lee? And then the question that I have following to that is it the brand, the VETgirl is you, and how scalable it is beyond you being the persona behind it? And do you think it has sort of a movement of VETgirl is about the lifestyle, the new lifestyle of veterinarians that are more out there and, they exercise and then they can consume the CE that way? Or is it more related to you? So how scalable that is, you think, and can it go beyond Justine? And is it sort of a brand on its own?
Sure, great question. We got a lot of pushback our first year from colleagues also with the name of VETgirl. And the reason why I named it VETgirl was because I considered myself VETgirl. I also did it because of the popularity of the term girl, not meaning for it to be derogatory in any way, but I actually based VETgirl on one of my favorite podcasts, Money Girl and Grammar Girl. And these are two of my favorite podcasts that I listen to all the time. There's Skinny Girl, there's, all these different names and brands out there with the name girl. And so totally not designed to be derogatory or sexist, but really just described me. And again, was based on pop culture. I can also say I wanted something short and sweet in a name. If I named it onlineveterinaryce.com, you wouldn't be having this podcast with me because you wouldn't have heard of me, right?
Or a veterinary innovation podcast with a bunch of letters.
Yeah, it had to be something short and sweet that people would remember. And so again, that's the main reason why we decided to go with it. It's also because of the changing demographic of our veterinary community. It's 60 to 80% female. Graduating classes are 90% female. Our veterinary conference, VETgirl U, was almost 90% female also. So again, definitely not designed to forget about our male colleagues. In fact, the COO of VETgirl is Dr. Garrett Pachtinger. So again, really used to describe me. And if you look at the logo, it looks like me. I didn't make her look quite as Chinese, but you get the general message.
Totally awesome. So unbelievable journey, incredible amount of followers, super innovative approach to CE delivery. What have you learned? What has been the hardest thing that you've learned about running a podcast? Share some of your insight. We're novice podcasters.
I would say since we teach through so many modalities, not just podcasts, we do, online webinars, we do real life rounds, which are designed to be short, sweet, 30-minute cage side rounds with a specialist. And we also do videos, or what I call how to do videos. I would say the biggest thing that I learned is you're always going to get pushback the more successful you are. You're always going to have trolls or haters. I will say Garrett and I do not read every single comment on Facebook on our VETgirl page, but I'm honored to say that with very, very little advertising dollars, $250 towards Facebook ads, just to get us up to 1,000 people, the rest has been viral and growth on its own. So I will say the biggest lesson I probably learned is go with your gut instinct. Despite the criticism of the name VETgirl initially, we stuck with it. Despite the pain and the sadness of having to give away podcasts when there's so much work to create. Strategically, that was a good marketing move for us just because it helped get our name out there. And I would say, my dad's philosophy, my dad's a retired pastor, is have the heart of a lamb, the skin of a rhino, because you will always have haters out there. So, we always try to stay positive and lift up our veterinary community, but once in a while we'll see some pretty negative comments on our VETgirl Facebook page or on social media. And, you just have to chin up and stay passionate and stay dedicated towards your main mission.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that one of those things I've seen the trend with some entrepreneurs that we're doing interviews with and the colleagues of mine that the negative comments and haters is probably the most common denominator in motivation of entrepreneurs. And certainly in my case, when I started SmartFlow, I remember I flew to Russia where my wife was residing at that point, and her dad met me at the airport. And on the drive, I told him, I want to create an app for veterinarians to do their clinical work. And he said, that's stupid and it's never going to work, and just go back and work as a veterinarian. It was quite a pleasure to prove him wrong 5 years later. But I think that in a way it's motivating to have those people that you're proving wrong and showing that you're after something, you're laser focused on your vision, and you execute on it without a blink despite the comments out there. So that's, yeah, I totally can resonate with that.
Haters are going to hate, but they're actually helpful. And let this be a message to all the haters. I had the same experience. I had a trusted mentor of mine that had several businesses, had a huge net worth. And I said, yeah, I'm going to start my own company. He said, no, you should sell insurance. And he's like, don't do that. And, the minute somebody says you can't or you shouldn't, it's the best thing that they can do for somebody that has the entrepreneur's makeup, because it's just going to make you go the opposite direction as quick and as hard and as fast as you can. And it's nice to get that motivation. So if they knew what they were doing, maybe they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I graduated over 20 years ago from Cornell, and my first year of vet school was the first year that we had email at Cornell. Even in undergrad where I went to Virginia Tech, we didn't even have school email. So like the technology has changed so much. And with that, reputation management has also been affected, social media. So much has changed. But I'm a firm believer that the veterinary field, and one of the things I love about it is it's so relational. And so I always tell people, even though I see all this negative energy, oftentimes in comments, I really think it's so important that we lift each other up. Nobody's going to practice perfectly. And, it could be something where I'll post a benign picture of, something, whatever, a splenectomy, and people will immediately go in judging, saying they're not gowned up, they're not draped correctly, blah, blah, blah. You know what? In real life, practices don't always offer that. And in other parts of the country, they don't offer that at all. And, our goal with VETgirl is to be able to save more lives by providing clinically relevant online CE. I was a total C student at Cornell. And so my goal is if I can walk away from a lecture with 2 to 3 things that are going to help improve the quality of care in my patient's life, that's our goal. And so keep in mind, I always tell people, especially new graduates, remember, veterinary medicine is so relational. Play nicely with everybody. Have a little bit less judgment, because we never know when we're put in that scenario. And, the third thing I always say is animals survive so much despite what we do. And just try to practice the best way you can. Try to always have that desire to continue to learn, to be the best doctor that you can be, to be the best vet student, the best technician you can be. But when in doubt, less judgment, please. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. We've interviewed some incredible people kind of leading up to this call and this meeting with you, Justine. And there's so many similarities in this group of innovators, these people that are, kind of doing things different than most people. It's interesting because that, whether it's the desire coming from a hater or it's just the, I guess, will to give back to an industry that really needs people like everybody that's kind of giving back to it to, lift people up a little bit. And it's just really interesting to kind of hear the same message over and over again in a different way. It's pretty inspiring. So it's kind of cool. So thanks for that.
So from the entrepreneurial sort of journey, when you had to pivot and decide that the podcast is sort of a giveaway, how did you change your model? Because as a business, you've created an incredible group of followers that now a lot of people identify themselves. I know people, they love your brand. But as a business, how did you modify your business model to actually continue this movement, if you will?
So Ivan, I will say we definitely made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. Even our first conference that we ever exhibited at, NAVC, or now called VMX, people thought we were a t-shirt company. So we spent, way too much money, tens of thousands of dollars on merchandise, trying to get our brand name out there. And in retrospect, that probably wasn't the right decision. The way we pivoted was we used to have a subscription model where it was $99 a year for a standard membership where you only get access to the podcasts. And you could still get CE through those podcasts. versus if you wanted the webinars in addition, so at least 12 to 20 hours of fresh new content a year, it would be $199 a year. And so we did that for about 2 years, had very few subscribe to just the podcast, so the standard membership. And so our pivot was, you know what? It's probably not worth it. Let's just go ahead and give these podcasts free. We were finding people just weren't paying for the podcasts. They were going to go ahead and pay for the full amount of CE to begin with. And so that's when we decided, well, we're just going to release it. And because of that, I will say, even though it pained us because of the amount of work, I definitely think it helped with just getting our brand name out there. So, you just have to roll with these life lessons as you start your small business and pivot and adjust as needed.
Justine, a question that seems to be coming to be commonplace is, out of all of the work that you've done, so this is a commonplace question for us in our podcast, recommendations for people that are trying to be innovative, books to read, questions to ask, things to look at. Do you have something that comes to the top of your head?
Well, the funny thing is, if you ask any of my classmates at Cornell, or even if I self-reflect, I never would have considered myself a small business owner. Again, I was a total C student. I had no interest in buying a practice. That wasn't anything I was interested in. I did not feel like I was smart enough to become a small business owner, quote unquote. And, it was just coming up with the idea where I saw a deficit. And I will say my one advice, barring the logo from Nike, is if you have a good idea, just do it. Because everyone comes up with awesome ideas. It's just a very small percentage that actually take it to the next level, because it's so much work, right? It's so much work to start an LLC, to find lawyers, to find small business accountants to help you get it off the ground, to be able to find the right business partner. So I always say, if you really feel like you have a good idea, just do it. Go for it, because most people will come up with a great idea, but they don't have the energy or the passion or the time to be able to bring it to the next level. Book-wise, I will say I didn't actually read a lot of small business books. My 2 to 3 favorite books that did help move me along my path from private practice to academia to industry to branching out into my own small businesses were probably 2 to 3 books off the top of my head. One of them was Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek, which I'm sure both of you guys have read.
Love that. Made me move to Bali.
Yeah. And a lot of that book is not applicable to veterinarians. Vets work in clinics. We can't, just decide we're only going to work 4 hours in the clinic. So a lot of it was not pertinent, but so much of it was on email etiquette. Something as simple as not responding to your most difficult clients, not wasting 80% of your time on 20% of your difficult clients. And so I learned a lot from that book. The second book that I really loved was How Full Is Your Bucket? And this is an old book. It's from the 70s. And it basically reiterated that we spend the majority of our time at work, but the way that we talk to our colleagues or receive comments or feedback from our colleagues often can deplete us. One person can walk down the hall and say, "Hey, Justine, the first year vet students were raving about your lecture." And that's going to completely fill my bucket, versus someone will say, "Oh, you got a client complaint, I'll tell you about it later." That completely depletes my bucket and ruins my day for me. And so it's just about the art of conversation. And I think you guys know the quote, "It's better to be kind than to be right." And it reiterates the importance of talking nicely to people, taking care of our colleagues. I wrote an article for Veterinary Team Brief years ago, probably 8-10 years ago, on my own struggle with suicide ideation during my first year of my residency. And we all are touched by colleagues who sadly have taken their own lives or who really struggle with depression. And so I will say that book was really important to me because it really reiterated the importance of your tongue and how you talk to your colleagues and how you talk to your family and loved ones. So those were probably the 2 biggest books that had the most influence in my life in the past decade.